Yes, thank you very much for inviting me here to KEXT, where I already got a good view this morning how really in Saudi Arabia open source is sponsored by the government, and there seems to be really a huge trend in getting those, investing in open source generally. So, let me see if I get the presentation on the screen. Thank you. So sorry for that. So very delighted to be here. Some more words about myself. So my name is Holger Dyroff, run business development for SUSE Linux Enterprise worldwide. I also serve as the vice chairman of a German Linux and open source organization called LISOG, which has collected about 120 memberships to really accelerate and promote commercial open source in the German market. As it was said, I joined SUSE back in April '93, which was very, very early in the development of Linux. And we had to do originally a lot of groundwork to actually get Linux established at all. Originally, the idea of Linux and open source back then was really not a lot known, right? A lot of things, however, have happened since, and today I want to go through some of those developments with you in order to show you why it's important to invest in open source, why the collaboration aspect of open source is so important, and also what needs to be done in order to make an open source project commercially successful. There are certain things and criteria which our customers and governments across the world expect, and when you build new projects or decide about investing in certain open source projects, I think it's very important to look at those type of criteria and replicate them for future open source projects to come. I will focus mostly on Linux as an operating system and infrastructure software generally, have a little bit of view on what's going on around systems management and what's going on around cloud computing in regards of open source adoption and which projects might survive in those spaces. 2011 actually is a great year for Linux because we are celebrating 20 years of Linux development. Linux started in on August 25th, 1999, when Linus Torvalds, who has been the inventor of Linux and who is now a fellow at the Linux Foundation, dropped an email to everybody on the internet and said, I'm doing a free operating system. And he said those famous words, he said, it's just a hobby. It really won't be big and not so professional like GNU. GNU being something where around the compiler, around glibc, around other open source projects, Richard Stallman had started a venture 10 years before Linux was invented, or quite some years before Linux was invented, which later on proved to be very, very favorable for the adoption of Linux because a compiler was already there, many other things needed for an operating system were already there, and with Linux we got this additional kernel. SUSE, the company I still work for, has then been founded in September 1992, back then by 4 students who discovered the idea of Linux on the internet and thought this is a great tool to market a software development company and to start a business, a startup business with just 4 students out of really university. And I think similar things can absolutely happen again around the globe and also here in Saudi Arabia based on the efforts you're putting into that. In March 1994, we had another great event, which was that the Linux 1.0 kernel was released. For us, this was a great point to really promote Linux more to enterprises, and that's where we really started. That was the time where we started to get the first contracts with customers like Deutsche Telekom or Deutsche Bank, mostly in Germany. A real big event happened around 1998. That's where the huge IT giants like an IBM, like HP, like Oracle decided that is something they are investing in. Before that, we already had collaborations with Intel, we had collaborations with IBM, of course, on a small level, but we never got the commitment from the highest executive ranks of those companies to say, yes, Linux is there to succeed, Linux is something we will recommend to our customers, and Linux is something we will develop software for and certify on, and I will show later why those certifications and those other things are so important. In 1999, we at SUSE were thinking, how do we bring this from a box and support business really to an enterprise level? And we invented the concept of enterprise Linux, and I'll show a little bit later how exactly that looks like and what the difference is there. And today, 2011, Linux is really everywhere. When I was flying here, the radar stations in Germany at the German air traffic control, they're running Linux. I'm sure when I landed here, somebody at the Riyadh airport is also using Linux in some way. Our mobile phones are running Linux kernels if they happen to be based on Android. And Linux is really, really used in many, many ways. And not just Linux, also a lot of other pieces of the operating system and the infrastructure level. And commercially, over 30%, and that's a worldwide number, of newly delivered servers get Linux installed by customers. And from my point of view, customers migrating from Unix to Linux is really not anymore a question of is it going to happen, it's only a question of when it's going to happen and when will Unix finally be legacy and not anymore deployed in a new fashion. So let's look what a Linux operating system, when we talk commercially about a Linux subscription, really consists of, and what we had to develop and assure in the ecosystem to exist in order for that whole system to make commercially sense. So a Linux subscription consists of software, which includes branding, documentation, and localization. However, this is not something we really can make money on because this is available for a free download. If you go to suse.com/download, you can get the complete code. It's right available there, and it's even coming for evaluation purposes with a 30-day free subscription. So the other concept we needed to invent is something we then called maintenance. Maintenance means that we promise to our customers that over a continuous time we deliver security fixes, bug fixes, and updates to them, and we give a commitment that on a continuous basis we will continue to invest in upgrades and new versions. And now those three things were really the original invention of what enterprise Linux is. We did go into the market with a 3-year lifecycle support back then, and I will show you later also how that evolved and what that means for you, for us, and our customers and the open source community generally. The two green things here are things we had to invent later over time and add towards a Linux subscription. One was what we call it SUSE Technology Assurance. Technology assurance includes indemnification and includes all kinds of legal protections around the open source software we are delivering to you as governments or as enterprise customers. That means if anybody says this is not really your code but my code which is in there, we will take over those challenges and take care of them, and you don't need to care about that. But that has really developed in a very, very important element of open source when we look how to make it relevant for the commercial side. When I was selling SUSE Linux Enterprise in the US, this was always, when we got to the legal department, a huge discussion. We spent a couple of months on how they would protect themselves, how those things would look like, and this is mostly solved in the meantime because of those standardized programs. But for new open source projects, this continues to be a challenge and always something which needs to be looked at very, very sophisticated and very, very detailed in order to assure that the complexity of open source licensing is taken care of. The other one was support. When we started, we were a small company out of Germany with maybe 20 people when we really started to serve large customers, and that worked locally. That didn't really work when we look at it from a global perspective. Today, we employ a couple of hundred support engineers worldwide in support centers. We also have a lot of local partners, and the presence of local partners who can provide support in local languages, who can provide support all the way to going on-site at a customer. This is another very, very important thing for open source. You must have people who are capable to serve customers, and that's always a huge investment for an open source project when it wants to proceed internationally. And then localization, and I heard about that this morning, that there continued some challenges for Arabic localization. When we started SUSE, one of the things we actually promoted was that it's localized in German, because we were the first Linux distribution where you could see German umlauts. Yeah, those are some special characters in the German language, and that was really what accelerated our business there and differentiated us. Of course, when we then did go to the US, you can't work the same way, but I think here, obviously in the Arabic countries, this is a very, very important thing and needs continuous investment by the vendors, the community, but also government organizations. So one other important thing, when we do a Linux distribution, then we really assemble about 1,500 different open source projects which we are delivering and supporting for our customers. So A, we have to select those, but B, we need to go through a process in which we can assure, besides the legal challenges, that quality is achieved. And quality for our customers means that it really cannot fail. Yeah? We have a lot of enterprise mission-critical customers on those systems. We have telco equipment providers like Huawei, CTE, Ericsson, and was Siemens Nokia, where you with your mobile connections depend on, and those things just cannot fail. So quality testing is a very important part. Another important part was to make Linux as an operating system multi-architectural. That means originally it was only running on an x86 system. We were able, together with IBM, to port this towards the mainframe. We ported it with Intel towards the Itanium. We ported it with AMD when x86-64 was invented toward this new x86-64 processor, and it's also running on Power. So all the important architectures are supported, and this provides some additional challenges on quality assurance. And if you have done, or if you think about an open source project like, let's say, MySQL, which needs not only to run on those Linux systems, but it also needs to run on Windows, on maybe some other operating systems, then you can think that quality assurance and how to do that is really key for an open source project to succeed. So we have really invested over time in a very ridiculous and very detailed quality assurance project, in which, by providing unique technologies we have in the meantime open sourced, like the Open Build service, where we have made those things easier for us. And as said, we open sourced it, so it's now available for other people to use as well. And we go through a very, very detailed quality assurance process, which includes feature testing, regression testing, and also then an overall system test. And also in the corner on the right, external quality tests where IBM, HP, our customers and others participate in beta testing, and where a lot of additional feedback is provided, which assures that when we release products that they are working in a very, very good way for you. And the outcome of that is really an enterprise class software at us called SUSE Linux Enterprise. At other Linux distributors it has other names. And this is where we then offer additional support, which is of course still needed, because a Linux kernel can be used in so many, many different ways. So I said before that with IBM together, we were engaging in a porting effort from SUSE Linux Enterprise on x86 towards SUSE Linux Enterprise on the mainframe. Actually, that's not completely true. Why? Because when we had originally invented the concept of Enterprise Linux, we were struggling how to sell this to customers and how to change the concept of selling. And IBM came and said, we want to have a Linux operating system for the mainframe. So in 1999, we were sitting down with them and said, particularly for the mainframe, this Enterprise Linux concept will work very well, because mainframe customers are used to stability. They are very, very used to high availability features. They're used to storage features. And they really need to have this concept of longer term maintenance as well as an integrated support offering. And today we really achieved that. Huge companies, one example is BTMU in Japan. This is one of the largest banks of Japan. They run their complete core banking software on top of SUSE Linux Enterprise Server on an IBM mainframe. And when I was there about 8 weeks ago, I was able to see their data center and really a couple of C196 servers from IBM running SUSE Linux Enterprise all along. And we also have established a rather large portfolio of ISV's applications on that. But for us, that was really one of the great successes where we were able to get a complete new customer group for Linux, because application modernization on the mainframe is very important, and there are not anymore this many applications available which you can put on the COS side of a mainframe. So Linux on the mainframe has really been a revival, and the open source project Linux, as well as we commercially, I think benefited quite a lot from that. I talked already a bit about lifecycle. So how does our standard lifecycle support today look like? I said originally we started with 3 years. However, that has not been enough. We continuously got from customers additional requests to say, can we not run the same version even longer without a change? What we learned in IT environments, they really hate change. Yeah? They don't want to upgrade their systems. They want to keep running the systems as long as they can. So today we actually provide a 10-year standard lifecycle. And for some customers, like as an example, Huawei for telecom equipment, we're actually offering the support for one particular service pack for up to 15 years. This is something where you need to assure that after, let's say, something breaks after 12 years, you actually still have engineers and knowledge on staff which are able to support this project. And this is for me really where typical open source projects and commercial open source make a difference, that there is some type of vendor who provides such life cycle commitments. because it's very easy to support an open source project while it's still maintained by the community. But the challenges really occur when the customer says, oh, I have deployed it now and I want to run it for 5 more years. And that's the type of services we are now delivering worldwide to our customers, which is something you don't need to consider when you start a project with your students, but something when it then goes into maintaining and into enterprise accounts need to consider and think about how to do this. Another really, really important piece has been certification and also interoperability. Certification, if you think about an operating system, it really cannot do a lot on its own. An operating system can do nothing without an underlying hardware. So from the beginning, we had to certify hardware. I think we got the first hardware certifications already in 94 or 95 with some of the, probably with Fujitsu back then, where we started those type of collaborations. And hardware certifications as well as software certification continues to be essential for an operating system. But if you think about other open source projects like middleware and other items, you always have to think, where are you running on? And is anybody else integrating with you? And how do you establish an ecosystem to make your open source project survive and your open source project really prosper in the community as well as worldwide? So if we look at what we have established in the meantime, I want to lay out 3 key industry relationships who have been very important for us to adopt Linux, and some of them have just been closed last year, like the one with VMware. Yeah? VMware has gone out and promoted and said, virtualization is the future operating system, you don't need operating systems anymore. However, last year, they, for me, did a little turnaround, which was they did an OEM contract with SUSE Linux and said, we are now providing SUSE Linux Enterprise Server with VMware subscriptions to our customers. And we hire people to support it, which did show me that even in a virtualized environment, absolutely operating systems are still relevant. But that key working together with VMware is really what makes the difference here. And we're also assuring that Linux runs in a most perfect way on top of VMware. And that's really where the community and the collaborative development process of Linux comes into play. If we look at Linux worldwide, we have about 3,000 developers working on it full time. And if somebody like VMware wants to enhance Linux to run perfectly on the VMware hypervisor, they don't need to pick up the phone and call that commercial vendor and say, can we work, and put NDAs in place and whatever. They hire kernel developers and they tell them, please make sure that our drivers are brought upstream, and they do that. So of the probably 3,000 people working full-time on Linux, I would say more than 1,000 are paid for by hardware or virtualization providers, Intel, IBM, etc., and have nothing else to do but to assure that those products from those IT giants are running in the most perfect way with Linux, and new features are put in there and enhanced. And of course, not every open source project will be able to get such a large community, but that's what really makes the difference. If we look at SAP, SAP has also made a clear recommendation that SUSE Linux Enterprise is the recommended operating system to their customers, and we're doing a lot of Unix to Linux migrations in particular with them, and they also are now delivering standardized appliances to our joint customers. And then a couple of years ago, we did a groundbreaking agreement with Microsoft, in which Microsoft started to embrace Linux, and in which Microsoft has invested resources in order to run Linux based on Hyper-V, or assure that OpenOffice and now LibreOffice has a perfect filter for their OpenXML standard. Yeah? So those key industry endorsements are things which then really will accelerate open source projects at some point in the life cycle. What I want to show here, just very quickly, is while we are working in a global infrastructure, the proximity and locality of people is still very important in our industry. So what I'm showing here, and I think when I look at the speaker list with people from Jordan and other Arabic countries here, you might be able to establish something similar here as well. What I'm showing here is 3 development centers in Germany, which are each in approximately of about 250 kilometers, which is SUSE in Nuremberg, IBM in Böblingen, where they do the key IBM mainframe development with over 1,000 people or so, and SAP, which happens to be in Waldorf. So I hope it can be seen, this is Germany, and really between those 3 development centers, we don't have more than 250 kilometers. So while global communities are perfect and can nicely collaborate, it should not be underestimated how much can be accelerated if people can meet and if people can work together at the same location or in close locations around something. And particularly between IBM, SAP, and Novell, I think we have established a lot of things in regards of optimization, in regards of other things, and this locality is really something, if you are able to get this for your open source project, it helps quite a bit. I talked about applications. Very quickly, I want to show you here how many ISV applications are certified in the meantime. So we today, and sorry for the font which shifted a little bit here, in totally we have more than 1,500 ISVs certified with more than 6,800 applications which are ready to run and ready to be consumed by governments as well as enterprise customers worldwide. And in the meantime, a lot of our, or quite some of our attention has also shifted towards this ISV ecosystem as the next step to promote Linux and Linux open source infrastructure against Microsoft Windows and against Unix, which is out there, but particularly Microsoft, because Microsoft Windows has one advantage, which is a huge reach of applications. Yeah, we are saying and talking here about 6,800 applications. I think if I look at the Microsoft Windows list, it's more something probably like in the 50,000 numbers of applications which are ready to run there. And we now need to talk with ISVs and need to convince ISVs that adoptions of open source technologies as their underlying infrastructure is what they actually should do and need to do. And we have embraced a unique delivery capability for ISVs, which we call an appliance, where we go to ISVs and say, everybody now has virtualization environments. Why are you not putting your application, your configuration needs, your middleware needs together and assure that you deliver it as one virtual image towards your customer? And that way you have a much easier support because you know exactly what they do and you have other advantages in software delivery. And we brought this so far that we, with SUSE Studio, are now providing to ISVs or enterprises even a one-click deployment into the cloud. So we have collaborated with Amazon, and towards Amazon EC2, you're now able to deploy your combination of application, middleware, configuration, and operating system, which Amazon calls an AMI, and you can deploy this with one click right to that Amazon cloud. So enterprise Linux is not just a kernel. I talked a lot about Linux and mentioned Linux very often, but there is much more. And one view on that, just so you see the complexity of that, is if we look at the high availability and storage stack, which we are delivering for SUSE Linux Enterprise Server. And this is a slide which shows you how that has evolved over time. We are at this time delivering a clustered file system as part of that. We are delivering a clustering software with Pacemaker. We're delivering installation tools and a lot of other things which are probably more like 300 different open source projects. And we put this in one product and call it SUSE Linux Enterprise High Availability Extension. Yeah? So alone that shows you that there is much more. And we think with those new developments, which have mostly happened over the last 3 years around storage and high availability, there is now no need anymore for proprietary commercial solutions like a Veritas or other high availability and clustering softwares. And that's a new and important extension really to the Linux capabilities. And I really cannot go through all the different open source projects, but there are many, many more where the community participates and where SUSE Linux participates and delivers it to the market. So now let me very quickly look at two different other areas, other than operating systems, where open source is starting to evolve. One is systems management, where we have an interesting situation that probably today most of you and your customers are using some type of proprietary patch management, configuration management system. And here, Red Hat has started a Fedora project called Spacewalk. The Spacewalk project is really an upstream version of Red Hat Network Satellite, and we at Novell, or now SUSE, have actually embraced this about 9 months ago. And together with the community and together with the Fedora project, we are now building a new modern generation of open source systems management, which will take care of all the Linux patch management, monitoring, and provisioning needs which you as users have, and we are able, yet another class of software, to deliver in open source and deliver this worldwide infrastructure for it. So this is very different from Linux, because you don't have hundreds of companies and 3,000 developers collaborating on this. You today have two major companies with SUSE and Red Hat collaborate here, and you have maybe 10 other companies somehow contributing, some small local consulting people contributing. So very different project, but still a very important milestone for our customers. And I think it also can show how different in scope such projects can be. Yeah? And it also shows how quickly, if something in open source out there exists, you can embrace it and make your own product and your own offering out of it. So in total, from the decision to the delivery for SUSE Manager, which is what we call the outcome of this, we did not take longer than 9 months. Yeah? So our total development life cycle for a complete new systems management software, rock solid, enterprise ready, because we adopted an existing open source project which is already out there, 9 months. There would have been no way, even with thousands of people, to start this from scratch, so meaning without any thing available there from day one. And that's really the power of open source. And if we look into cloud computing and cloud infrastructure, there is another interesting project. I want to give you a quick view on it and develop some ideas where this might go, which is OpenStack. This is an open source cloud infrastructure project which has been initiated by Rackspace and NASA, Rackspace being the second largest cloud hoster in the world. In the meantime, about 60 companies have joined into the development, which for an open source project, I mean, I did show you how long Linux took. This didn't even take a year for 60 companies to join that project. So this is going very quickly right now. First startups have already been founded, one of them, or have been funded actually, founded is a different step from funding, that has happened in Japan actually. And that's a small startup called Midora, who have received $103 million in seeding money in order to provide commercial services on this open source project. And it's competing, of course, with other open source projects, but those are less open. And interestingly, here, it seems the more open the project, the more viability and the quicker people also join. And I think that this collaborative approach around cloud computing will probably have the most traction in the future. It's always difficult to predict future, and we have to see what really establishes itself, but OpenStack certainly is something which is at the forefront of that potential. So in summary, just a couple of things I want to again point your view on, which I have mentioned during the presentation. Open source is really a collaborative development effort. Yeah? And collaboration is really what's important here. You do need many, many people work together, globally or locally, to make your project successful. And as soon as such momentum is reached, there is really no border. We talked before, Linux kernel now is really everywhere, and other open source projects have achieved the same things. The next important thing, and I guess I can easily say this as a representative of commercial open source, but I think it's really true. Open source is not a hobby. In order for a project to succeed, significant either commercial or government resources need to be invested for developing, marketing, selling, and community building in order to gain the interest for an open source project to truly succeed. If you only have hobbyists, it will die at some point, and no customer can trust on the lifecycle support he needs, like I was trying to explain. Next important point, global and local support. And I really truly say both, because I think you need to have both for your project. Just global support might mean it's only run at the largest guys and not really accessible to local communities and local customers. So both global as well as local support structures, training, consulting, training also in the language, documentation in the language, those are things which are important for a project to really succeed. And one word about SUSE. We really have been committed to open source since the founding in 1992. However, for us, open source is not a mandate. We really see open source as a collaborative development model which helps us to bring our products to market quicker and of course we are open source from our DNA, but we also have today and will in the future keep certain things proprietary. Why do we do that? Because if we are the only company investing in a project like SUSE Studio and there is no real collaboration, it doesn't make sense for us. And for every new project, we're really looking, does it make sense? Does it bring us a business advantage if we make it open source or if we bring it out in a collaborative way? And that's another important thing. Open source is not something which needs to happen everywhere. And I'm not yet sure if open source will win in things around user interfaces, ERP systems, and other areas. It has a good chance, but the more user interface building is required, I think the more difficult it will get to bring collaborative people with the same interest together who do not just talk with each other if the button should be on the left side or the right side. So there are things which are more difficult for open source projects and things which are much more easy for open source. And again, I can not often enough mention that collaboration is not unilateral. That really means participation is the important thing. And in order to make participation happen, you need to have your open source project release early and release often, which is one of the core mandates of every open source project out there. I hope I was able to give you a good overview how SUSE started, how it evolved, how things can happen to open source projects, how Linux has really evolved over the last 20 years. Yeah? And again, this is about collaboration, globally and locally, and those ecosystems to collaborate need to be built, and that's what we're here for. Thank you.